My dad was a grain buyer with the Alberta Wheat Pool. I believe he started in 1936.
Well, I do have a lot of really good memories of grain elevators. And a lot of them are related to my dad.
You knew the town existed when you drove by and saw it, because every town had its town name on the elevator.
The smells, the sounds, you touch the wood that's been smoothed by hundreds and thousands of bushels of grain going by. You smell the air, the musty air and things. You can walk on the wooden planks.
Probably no more iconic symbol of the prairies than an elevator.
It's something, I guess it means something to me. You think, well, it should mean something to the future generation too.
In May of 1969, a raging fire leveled 3 grain elevators in the town of Milk River, Alberta. Many prairie communities were witness to the same fate.
This is when the elevator had a dust explosion, because the flames had gone up the man lift area and got up to the top and started a fire and created an explosion, and it ended up blowing the whole roof off the elevator.
The time it takes to destroy an elevator is mere moments in comparison to the lifetime it served on the prairies. These proud titans stood for community, small town, the heartland, and home. They once dotted our landscape, but they are no more. What are the prairie titans? What do they mean to us now? What did they mean to the region back then? The elevator is not simply about grain. It was a pillar of the community, which promoted cooperation and camaraderie.
Oh, goodness, it was usually a very good relationship, because you lived in the community where the farmers did, and usually you would play hockey together, you curled together, you did camping together, you did all sorts of activities with your clients per se, or with the farmers. So you usually had a very good relationship with the farmers in the community.
Akin to today's office water cooler, the elevator was where farmers came to gather, socialize, gossip, and swap stories. It was a small community of people with shared interests. As you look around the countryside at the dwindling number of grain elevators, you will notice a difference in their style. Elevators were initially built in the shape of silos. Most of the structures that dot our landscape are known as the sloped shoulder country elevator. It is a true icon of the prairies.
When you build a grain elevator, they use planks for the wall, and I think it was 2x6s, and they lay them flat on tape, and they nail these down. There was no special jobs. Every man worked on all jobs on it, and digging and everything else, and cement, the whole works. When they were going to paint the elevator, they'd have scaffold. They'd run ropes from up above, and they had a plank that they were on. But they had no safety things of anything. They stood on this plank, and if you would have pushed against the wall,
By the time World War II began, 5,758 licensed elevators were in use in Canada. By 2017, only 110 elevators on railway rights-of-way were still standing in Alberta, very few being used for their original purpose. A grain elevator holds wheat, oats, barley, flax, and rye, the cereal grains. It is the structure in which a farmer's grain is weighed and stored until its departure via rail to local and international markets.
We graded, we shipped, we did all those things to keep our commerce going and shipping grain all over the world.
Before the invention of elevators, the collection of wheat and other grains was very labor-intensive. Farmers would haul sacks of grain to spots along the railroad where it was manually lifted into a rail car. When the crop became sustainable and reserves began to grow, they needed to find a method to store the loose grain until rail cars became available for transporting it.
It was electric augers and electric motors that ran the leg in the elevator. But there were a few elevators back then that had what they call a big one-lung gas or diesel engine that you'd have to go in and kick it over and start it. You would chug, 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 and that would run the elevator. But from that, of course, the augers and the annexes and that was so much nicer in the elevators that were electric.
The elevator agents were members of the community and had an interesting role to play. They directed the acceptance, payment, and rejection of grain. The agents were essentially in control of the farmer's pay. It was a balancing act. They had to make money for the elevator while ensuring quality product was accepted into the facility.
My dad was a grain buyer with the Alberta Wheat Pool. He really enjoyed working with the farmers.
Of course, as an elevator agent or an elevator manager, you were responsible for buying grain off of the farmers and ranchers that did grow some grain in the community. And with that, you would buy it, grade it and buy it. Then you would store it, and then when you were able to, you would ship it.
You know, as a kid, I loved to go along with my dad in the truck, and I would clean the elevator. And my dad would say, you know, if you want to grab that mop there. And
the average work for an elevator man, maybe you'd start at 8 in the morning. It was a busy time in the fall. You'd maybe start earlier, but you can't harvest unless it's really warm. They're not harvesting early in the morning. So you're trying to accommodate the farmer, because if you don't accommodate them, there's another elevator agent just next door to you who will accommodate them.
Some of the winters that I went along with Dad, and it would be so cold, and my dad would be, you know, layering clothing just to stay warm. And I remember the stove in the office, and we'd stand by the stove just to stay warm.
Well, we did everything from all the cereal grains: barley, rye, flax, canola, rapeseed we called it back then, winter wheat, spring wheat, durum wheat, pretty much every mustard, pretty much every type of crop that they grow today.
Particularly harvest time, my dad would really take on the stresses and the pressures of the farmers. He had a lot of feeling for them. It was sort of like he knew that was their livelihood, and that the year really depended on getting the crop off.
Grain elevators needed to stay current with the times. If a company elevator had reached maximum capacity, the farmer would turn elsewhere. Or, if the elevator was simply seen as too small, the railway would reduce the number of stops at that particular location. Elevator designs started changing to keep up with the growth, transforming from the traditional wooden sloped shoulder and making way for two entirely new styles, the buffalo slope and the 888 concrete silos. Perhaps the local sales representatives understand the game better than anyone.
Because they changed so much, I've kind of seen how they've matured. They still take grain from the truck, from the producer, and load it in the rail cars. And some of those rail cars have been around since I started.
The farmers, they're getting bigger and bigger all the time. They're almost, or most of them, some of them are a corporation. I think the producers are a lot more savvy to the price of wheat too now. They watch the futures market of what wheat is doing in December or whatever, and then they play that market intelligently, which is good. They're there to make a buck too.
Now, this high throughput elevator, we can load 112 cars in anywhere from 18 to 20 hours. Speeds it up considerably.
It's made it more efficient cost-wise. You know, a lot of the newer elevators are bigger. That throughput tons per hour is way higher than it would be at a smaller place. But it has its downsides too. That the smaller places were, I remember they're community places, right? You go and have a coffee, shoot the breeze with a guy in an elevator. I remember those days.
I mean, life is faster paced now in all aspects, and the producers value their time too, whereas they'd have time for a game of crib back then, but nowadays they certainly don't. and that isn't something we'd have time to do ourselves anyway. So yeah, it's changed.
Like with all other industries, the flour milling industry has had to stay on top of the increasing demand. The solution? Technological advancement. Parrish and Heimbecker, also known as P&H, is a great example of the company staying up to date and implementing high-efficiency modifications within their facilities. Originally built in 1906, Lethbridge's flour mill used to be known as the Ellison Milling Company. P&H purchased the facility in 1975, and while P&H keeps pace with the changing technology, they remain proud of their local roots.
I'm the assistant plant superintendent. I've been in this facility 4 years, 4 and a bit. I worked for P&H Milling in Ontario for 19 years. Wheat comes in the door in our elevator, and we clean it. There's rocks, stones, bits of combine, whatever in there, and we have to take that out. It's a naturally contaminated commodity. It's relatively new technology. Takes a picture of the wheat traveling on an angled conveyor, and if it sees something that's not the right shape or color, it shoots it with a blast of air, and away it goes. PLCs, computerization of equipment, and the controls of turning stuff off and on remotely, really, that's huge. Instead of you guys went running up to the 5th floor to turn a valve, now you push a button and away you go. The use of pneumatics in the mill. We use air to move stuff around. Air and gravity. Gravity's cheap, so buy it.
After the grain is sorted, it is gently crushed into a fine powder for the standard wheat flour that is used in most baked goods, as well as semolina flour that is used in pasta. It is tested, bagged, and sold to companies across the nation and the globe. As agricultural technology advanced, farmers needed to progress too. If they didn't keep up with the changing technology or diversify their crops, they would surely fail. Many of the smaller farms that couldn't keep up were bought out by larger landowners. As more land was gobbled up, these farms essentially turned into corporations, making it increasingly difficult for small-time farmers to succeed.
Well, there's been a lot of evolution in farming since I certainly, hit the ground or first rode around in a tractor with my dad or that type of thing.
It seems like the farm is becoming bigger and bigger and more business-like. I think that's been part of the elevator, leaving those small towns with rail lines shutting down and big inland terminals, those big concrete terminals that you see. So farmers, would truck their grain to those with semis or hire people or maybe buy their own semi. And it just seems the smaller farms were being bought up by larger and larger farmers.
So life was relatively simple. The community was still populated. We had lots of neighbors that lived close by. The school bus was full going to town. So those things have changed. We have a lot less neighbors all the time. We don't have very many young people in our school.
I think our town, which was once very thriving when I was a young kid, is going to be like those towns like a Battram, Saskatchewan, that was thriving maybe 30 years before I grew up. But now, in 10 years, a town like Lancer will be like a Battram, where it'll just be, nothing much there anymore.
There's been lots of rural depopulation because of, it's kind of a big is better scenario in agriculture for years and years and years. And this kind of relates to the grain elevators.
Like even our town had 4 or 5 or 6 elevators at one time. And when I grew up, I remember 2, the Sask-Wee-Pool elevator and our Pioneer elevator. But there was towns that had 7 or 8 elevators. And then slowly, and even in the 50s and 60s, that slowly started to go away, and different rail lines changed and things like that. So some towns just started to die off.
They really signaled, I think, another, exodus of people from the area, and jobs, taxes, gone. Get bigger, go home.
Many wooden elevators did not make it to their retirement years. They succumbed to fire first. If not repaired, our prairie sentinels pose a safety risk, especially as they are continually exposed to the elements. And if not taken care of, the wood is prone to weather, splinter, and collapse If proper security measures aren't put in place, these buildings are easy targets for anything ranging from petty vandalism to arson. Taking all the factors into consideration, many companies have simply chosen to tear down the elevators, thus avoiding the liability. So what happens to the elevators that aren't refurbished but aren't torn down? They're simply left to rot. Birds and mice make them their home. They become a desolate fixture of the community, or are in isolation in the middle of the prairie.
This is the last ogly flower grain elevator left in Alberta that still has the markings on the side. A few times people are like, why are you doing this? Like, they just bulldoze them over and be done with it and stuff. And it's like, well, yes, that's true. We can't save everything, but like, we need to save something at least, I think. The reason why it's important is like it helped form towns, it helped form companies, it helped form people's lives. Like, they were employed by the elevator. That's something we want to look at as well, because we like to kind of make sure that it is staying in place, and if it has a historic designation on it, at least it's another layer of protection in a ways, just to prevent, possible demolition.
Everyone on the prairies has a fond memory or story about grain elevators. Most of us draw a connection to our parents or our grandparents. A marker on a road trip. A distinct symbol of a simpler time. A beacon calling us home. Grain elevators take us back to our childhood and offer a meaningful wave of nostalgia. Though these titans once dominated the prairies, they've now grown almost silent. Their beginnings may seem humble, but their presence played a crucial role in building today's local communities and economy. We must give the exceptional elevators the reverence they deserve, while embracing the technology that has helped heighten food sustainability, as well as our role in the global market. Let us pay tribute to the vanishing skyline.
It's just still like the prairie landscapes, they're just part of it, it's just like barbed wire fence posts and everything.
I hate to see them disappear, but again, it's not logical that we could keep them all and just have them sit as as a showpiece or whatever it is on the prairies.
As the elevators changed color and the blue color of the wheat pool elevator, I always thought it was kind of funny. My dad painted the barn at the farm and some of the buildings there. He painted them that blue and trimmed them with white. So I guess you'd say he was very proud of the wheat pool.
The art of milling is going away. That you had guys that could mill flour, and they didn't need computers or anything like that. They just go, it's by feel, actually.
The town's gone, the elevator's gone, the railway's gone, the school's closed, so then it's just some mailboxes and a couple houses and a few streetlights, that's it, and then you can...
Do you know, it really takes me back to my childhood and the happy memories, and I think of my dad.